One of the most basic mistakes that people make when thinking about the relationship between the Bible and theology is that they'll think that theology comes from the Bible in a rather simple and direct sort of way. And because they think this, they'll take their various theological beliefs that they have and they'll read them back into the biblical text, thinking that's going to help them interpret and make sense of these stories that they see in the Bible. So, for example, somebody might have the belief that God is good. Wonderful. I share that belief as well. And they'll take this belief that they have and they'll read it back into a text like, say, Numbers 31, where God commands a combination of genocide and sexual enslavement. And then they'll find themselves in the unenviable situation of trying to justify how this is in fact good. After all, if God is good and God is issuing this command, then this command must be good, right? Of course, once you've justified genocide and sexual enslavement, all moral discourse goes out the window. You can't really reason with somebody who thinks those things are good, at least on some occasion. And of course, you're probably scared away all clear-thinking people who don't want to have a personal relationship with or worship a deity who thinks these things are good. This is the deconstructive option. But ending up in this unenviable situation is totally avoidable, and the way that we avoid it is by dispensing with this idea that theology comes from the Bible in a rather simple and direct sort of way. Rather, theology comes from the Bible in the same sort of way that houses come from trees. Trees are definitely in there somewhere, but only after you've taken those trees and you've cut them down and you've processed them and you've worked them over and you've built them to purpose and you've combined them with a whole bunch of other ingredients and conveniences in order to make them into a modern house. We go through a very similar process when we get theology from the Bible. We have all these verses in front of us that we could be using. So very often what we have to do at the beginning is select some of these verses to be relevant to the theological topic that we're considering at the time. And then we need to narrow it down still further by prioritizing some of these verses over others and by qualifying some of these verses in terms of others. And it's only once we've done this interpretive work can we then take these now highly processed and neatly organized verses and combine them with the other ingredients that are going to be used to create theology. Other ingredients like personal experience and religious tradition, and very often reason and philosophy as well. The belief in God's goodness, for example, comes as much from Neoplatonic philosophy as it does from anything that's happening in the biblical text. And it's really only then, once you've assembled all these ingredients, can you then construct theology out of them. And theology really is like a house in the sense that once you've built it, you've got to live in it. And so you should probably make sure that your house isn't doing anything untoward, like, justifying genocide and sexual enslavement. But just like if a particular tree isn't going to work in your house, you don't need to use it. Similarly, if a particular chapter in the Bible isn't going to work in your theology, you don't need to use that either. You can look a chapter like this square in the eye and say, this chapter is not going to be part of my theology of God's goodness.